pregnant and thrown from a moving train. A Lakota chief caught her and fathered her child. The hand I put out that morning was not a kind hand. I want to say that first. It was not gentle, and it was not the hand of a man who expected to hold anything soft. It was a hand that had split buffalo bone, that had drawn a bowstring back until my shoulder burned, that had pressed flat against the chest of dying men, both enemies and brothers, and felt the last air go out of them. That hand. I had ridden out before first light because the gray mare had come up lame, and I wanted to look at the fetlock myself, away from the noise of the camp, away from the young men who watched me for something to read in my face. Being chief is like being a fire. People are always gauging how hot you are. I needed quiet. The November grass was iron-colored. The sky had that particular white it gets before snow that feels less like weather and more like a decision the world has already made. I remember the cold on my jaw and the steam off the mare's back, and the way the ground was so hard it rang when she walked. I heard the train before I saw it. It ran about 2 miles west of the Cheyenne River, following a cut through the low bluffs where the railroad men had blasted in years before. We had watched them do it. We had watched and said nothing because saying something would have cost more than we had left to spend. The sound was ordinary at first. Steam, the iron wheel cry, the low percussion of it moving through rock. I was not watching it. I was watching the mare's left leg. Then I heard something that was not the train. I am not sure what it was exactly. A sound partway between a scream and not cut short, like a word someone thought better of saying. I looked up. I saw the dark shape of the train moving in the cut, and I saw something come off the side of it, turning in the air, not a bag, not a crate, wrong weight, wrong fall, and hit the embankment and roll down the gravel slope into the frozen grass at the bottom. I sat still for 2 full breaths. This is something people misunderstand about me. They think stillness is doubt. It is not. It is seeing. Then I kicked the mare and we went. She was lying face down when I reached her. White woman, young, I put her at no more than 22, maybe less, wearing a brown coat that had been good once and was not good now, torn at the shoulder and gray with the grime of the train. Her hair was dark and had come loose from wherever she'd pinned it and was spread across the frost. I swung down and crouched beside her and put my fingers to her throat and felt the pulse there, fast and thread-thin but real. I turned her over. Her coat fell open. I have seen many things in my years that I did not expect. I did not expect this. She was carrying a child, well along 6 months, perhaps 7. The belly was round and hard under the cotton of her dress, and when I put my hand there flat, the way you do when you need to know if something is still alive, I felt it move. A kick small against my palm. I looked at the train, disappearing around the far bend of the cut. I looked at her face. She had a cut above the left eye. Her lip was split. These were not injuries from the fall. These were made by hands before she went off the train. Someone had hit her and then someone had thrown her. I am not a man who shows what moves through him. I have trained myself out of it over many years because a chief who lets his face speak before his mouth does is a chief who loses things. But something went through me right then that I am not going to name cleanly because language isn't built for it. It was not pity. It was older than pity. It was the thing that makes a man's hands become instruments. I got her onto the mare as carefully as I could manage alone. She came awake partway through the lifting, one sharp, terrified sound, and then her eyes found my face and something happened in them that I had not seen a white woman's eyes do when they found my face before. She went quiet, not the quiet of someone who has given up, the quiet of someone who has made a decision. She gripped the front of my coat with both hands, and she did not let go for the entire 2 miles back to camp. Her name was Nell Marsh. I learned it later. From the look of her, I would have said Illinois or Missouri, somewhere flat and agricultural, the daughter of somebody who worked land. She had good hands for it, wide at the knuckles, calloused, and she carried herself a certain way even injured, a way that told you she had been useful all her life and expected to go on being useful. The women in camp saw us coming and came out to meet us, and I gave Nell to them and went and unsaddled the mare. My aunt, who had delivered half the children born to our band in the last 30 years, and whose name I will not say here because she passed in the winter 2 years on, she came and found me while I was rubbing the mare down. She stood behind me a moment without speaking. I knew she was there. I kept working. She said, "The child is alive. The woman will be sore for a week, but she will be whole." I said, "Good." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Someone put his hands on her before she went off that train." I said, "I know." She said, "She asked about you." I went on rubbing the mare. My aunt said, "She asked who found her." I told her it was the chief himself. She said my aunt paused here, choosing the translation. She said that she thought so. I did not know what to do with that at the time. I put it away in the place where I put things I do not yet understand and went about my day. Nell stayed in my aunt's lodge for 11 days. I did not go in. This was not avoidance. The injured need quiet, and women understand injury differently than men do, more completely, more practically, and my aunt had it in hand. I made myself available at the edge of things. I was there if I was needed, but I did not insert myself. On the 12th day she came out on her own. Late morning, the air thin and cold, the camp going about its work. She stood at the entrance to my aunt's lodge in a borrowed blanket, and she looked around the camp with the careful look of someone memorizing an exit that isn't there. I was across the camp. I was talking to 2 of my younger men about a problem with the Western Range. I watched her out of the side of my attention. After a moment she turned, and across all that distance and all that noise, she found me, like she had known exactly where I was. She raised her hand. I raised mine. That was all for that day. She began to get up and move around the camp after that. She was cautious, but she was not scared, or she had made a decision to set the scared aside and be useful instead. She helped with the hides. She helped with the younger children who did not know to be cautious about her and so weren't, and she responded to that by becoming a different version of herself, warmer, quicker to smile. I watched this. I watched her because that is what I do. I watch things. I have been watching things all my life and building a picture of the world from what I see, and Nell Marsh went into that picture and rearranged some of what I thought I knew about it. I will tell you what I mean by that. I had understood white women the way you understand things you have observed from a distance. The wives and daughters of settlers, the women at the trading post, the missionaries' wives. I understood them as a category that was mostly afraid of me. Not personally, not of me specifically, but of the idea of me, of the idea of all of us. That fear is in the air in this country like the smell of a fire that never quite goes out. I had never had cause to question it. Nell was not afraid of me. She was not reckless either. She was not the kind of woman who is foolishly brave, who mistakes not showing fear for having no good sense. She watched things the same way I did. She built her picture carefully, and somewhere in that picture she had put me down as a man who could be trusted. I did not know how she had decided that. She had been unconscious when I found her. She had seen my face for 2 seconds before going under again. And yet, I went and sat near her one afternoon. She was working on a piece of hide, doing the scraping, which she had learned from my aunt with the focused attention of someone who takes all work seriously regardless of whether it is new to her. She looked up when I sat down and then went back to the work. We were quiet for a while. The wind was from the north and smelled like snow coming. One of the camp dogs came and sat between us because camp dogs always go to the warmest spot, and apparently the warmest spot was between us. She said without looking up, "I want to thank you for what you did." I said, "A man does not need thanks for not leaving a woman in a ditch." She stopped working. She looked at me then straight, the way she had from across the camp that first day. She had gray eyes. I had not been close enough to see this before. and they were direct in the way of someone who has learned that looking away costs more than it saves. She said some men would have. I said some men. She looked at the hide and went back to working. Then she said, I need to tell you about the train. I said, you do not have to tell me anything. She said, I know I don't have to. I waited. Her husband, I am not going to use his name. He does not deserve the space his name takes up. Her husband had decided that the child was not his. He had decided this based on the timing of things. He said, based on arithmetic, he said. And he may have been right or he may have been wrong, but either way, arithmetic is not what you use to make the decision he made. He had made it before they left Kansas City. He had waited until they were 3 hours into the territory where there is no law and no one much looking, and then he had made her pay for what he had decided. She told me this flatly. Not without feeling. I could see the feeling in the set of her jaw, in the way her hands went still on the hide, but she had wrapped the feeling in something hard so it would not come apart while she spoke. When she finished, she did not look at me. She kept her eyes on her hands. I sat with what she had told me for a moment. I thought about the cut above her eye and the split lip and the bruising I had seen along her jaw when I turned her over. I thought about the 2-second decision she had made when she looked at my face and went quiet instead of screaming. I said, you are safe here. She looked up. I said, you and the child. You are safe here for as long as you need to be safe. She held my eyes for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, I knew when you found me. I asked her how she could have known that. She said, I don't know how to explain it, I just knew. I looked at the dog between us, who had gone to sleep. I said, that is not a bad way to know a thing. The snow came 4 days later. Not a hard storm, just the first real snow of winter, 2 inches on the ground by morning, and it changed the camp the way snow always does, made it quieter, made the distances look different, made everything feel like it had been left out overnight and come back clean. The child chose the snow to announce itself more definitively. Nell had been feeling something off for 2 days, not pain exactly, she said, more like the child was running out of room and had opinions about it. My aunt looked her over and said, soon, but not yet. Then on the second night of the snow it became yet. I was awake. I am usually awake in the nights. I have not slept cleanly since my wife died 4 years back, and before that I slept lightly because a chief who sleeps deeply is a liability to his people. I heard the sounds from my aunt's lodge, and I sat up and built the fire and I waited. My aunt came for me just before first light. I had not expected her to. Birth is women's work and I was not the father of this child, and there was no particular reason for my aunt to come to my lodge. She came anyway. She said, she is asking for you. I said, it is not appropriate. My aunt looked at me the way she had been looking at me since I was 4 years old, which is to say she looked at me as though appropriate was something I had invented just now for no good reason. She said, she is asking. I went. Nell was propped against a rolled blanket, her hair dark with sweat, her face tight with the work of it. She looked at me when I came in and something in her face did a thing I can only describe as relief, which made no particular sense to me because I am not a midwife and I could not help with the mechanics of what was happening, but there it was. She put her hand out. I sat beside her and I took it. Her grip was remarkable. I mean this precisely. Her grip was the grip of a woman who had spent her life handling things that needed to be held, and she held my hand the way she held everything, as though letting go was not an option she was considering. It was not a frightened grip. It was a grip that said, you are here, and I am using that. I stayed. The child came a little after sunrise. A girl, small but loud, which my aunt said was a good sign, and which I believed immediately because the sound she made was the sound of something with strong opinions, and strong opinions are useful in this world. Nell held her and looked at her, and then she looked at me. She said she is here. I said she is here. Nell said she will need a name. I said that is your work. Nell looked at the child, at her dark wet hair and her already working face, and then she looked at the snow outside the smoke hole, the gray white of it against the pale sky. She said, I want to call her Morning. Is that, she paused, is that a name you would use? I said, it is a name we would use. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the child, at Morning, who had stopped crying and was simply being, the way new things are before they understand there is anything to be troubled about. Nell said, then that is her name. She could have left in spring. She knew that. I knew that. My aunt knew that. No one said it because no one needed to say it. It was simply a fact that lived in the air of the camp, like the fact of the mountains to the west, present without needing to be named. The deep cold held through January and into February. There is a particular length of time in winter when survival takes all the attention, and there is nothing left over for deciding things. And we lived in that length of time together, and it was, in its way, a relief to us both, I think. No one decides anything in deep winter. You only tend what you have. Nell tended Morning the way she tended everything, thoroughly, without drama, with a focused practicality that I had come to recognize as her primary mode in the world. Morning was a responsive child. She ate, she cried when she needed something, she slept hard when she slept. Nell wore her under her coat when she worked, a thing the women in camp showed her how to do, and Morning seemed to find this an acceptable arrangement. I watched Nell in the way I had been watching her since the beginning, building my picture. What I saw in that picture by February was this: a woman who had been put down as something worth throwing away and had refused the assessment. She was not performing survival. She was not being brave about things that frightened her. She was simply, and I am trying to find the right word here and there may not be one in either language. She was simply herself, fully, without the performance of anything else, and that self was strong and patient and clear-eyed and kind in the specific way that people are kind when kindness is a choice they are making, not a reflex. I was not looking for this. I want to say that plainly. I was not looking to feel anything about a white woman who had come off a train onto my land and into my camp. My wife had been dead 4 years, and I had understood in those 4 years that her dying had not left a space that would be filled. I had understood that as clearly as I understood weather, as clearly as I understood the river in spring. A man can misunderstand weather. We began to talk in the evenings, not about anything in particular. This is actually how it started, not with important things but with ordinary ones. She told me about Illinois, the particular flatness of it, the way the wind came across the corn in summer like something enormous trying to get somewhere. I told her about the river when I was young, before so much of this. She had questions that were not intrusive and answers that were not self-protective, and we talked the way people talk when they have decided that the other person is worth talking to. Morning slept on a rolled blanket between us on these evenings. The fire burned low. Outside, the deep winter sounds whined off the river, the occasional crack of a tree giving up against the cold. One night in late February she said, "Tell me about your wife." I had not been asked this by anyone. In my experience, people do not ask a man about his dead wife because they are afraid of what will come out of him when they do. I looked at Nell across the fire and she was looking at me straight, the way she always looked, the gray eyes steady. I told her, her name, the sound of her laugh which was sudden and real and had embarrassed her sometimes because it was loud. The winter before she died, when she had been sick and I had sat outside the lodge every night unable to go in because inside was the sound of her coughing, and I was afraid, and I did not know what to do with being afraid. The morning she died, a Tuesday, the smell of the sage my aunt had burned. Nell listened. She did not make sounds to show she was listening. She did not nod in the particular reassuring way people nod when they want you to know they are engaged. She simply listened, fully, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, She sounds like someone worth missing." I said she was. Nell looked at Morning on the blanket between us. Morning was doing the thing she sometimes did in sleep, where her mouth moved slightly, as though she was working on a thought. Nell said, "I am sorry you lost her." I said, "I am sorry for the thing that happened to you on that train." She met my eyes. She said, "I know you are. I knew it from the first minute." I said, "You keep saying that you knew things from the first minute." She said, "I do. I know you think it's not rational." I said, "I did not say that." She said, "You didn't have to. You make a particular face." This surprised me. I said, "What face?" She thought about it. She said, "The face of a man who is deciding whether to believe something. It's quite serious. But you don't dismiss things. The face is serious but not closed. There's a difference." I looked at the fire. I said, "You have been studying my face." She said very simply, "I have been studying everything about you." The fire moved. Outside, the wind had come up and was working at the edge of the lodge. I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you are worth studying." I did not look up from the fire. I was aware of exactly how I was sitting and where my hands were and the sound of my own breathing, which is not something I am usually aware of. I said, "Nell." She said, "Yes." I said, "What are you asking me?" She was quiet for a moment. Morning made a small sound in her sleep, and Nell glanced at her and then back at me, and she said, "I am not asking you anything. I am telling you something." I looked up then. She said, "I know what I am. A white woman with another man's child in a Lakota camp in the middle of a country that has decided it owns all of this. I know what I cost you if I stay. I know what I am worth in the eyes of the world out there. I know all of that." She had not looked away. She said, "I am telling you that you are the most honest man I have ever been near. That you found me in a ditch and made me safe and never asked for anything, and never made me feel like I was a burden you were managing. I am telling you that Morning knows your face the same way she knows mine, and she is 3 months old and she knows what she knows." She stopped. She had said what she had come to say. I looked at my daughter. Because she was my daughter by then in every way that mattered to me. The way she tracked the sound of my voice, the way she went still when I held her, the particular expression she made that was already its own expression, already a face that was not her mother's face or any other face but hers. My daughter. I looked at Nell. I said, "The people of this camp have been asking me since the snow started whether you would leave in spring." She said, "What did you tell them?" I said, "I told them that was your question to answer, not mine." She said, "And what would you like the answer to be?" This is the moment I have turned over every day since. Not because I did not know what I wanted, I knew clearly, I had known for weeks, but because wanting a thing and saying it out loud are different weights, and I had lived long enough to respect the difference. Saying a thing makes it real in a way that wanting it does not. I said, "I would like you to stay." Nell looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across Morning, across the sleeping baby between us, and she put her hand on the side of my face. Her palm was warm and dry and rough from the hide work, and she held it there the way she held everything, with intention, without drama, and she looked at me and she said, "Then I will stay." I put my hand over hers. Outside, the wind, the fire, Morning breathing her small breathing. Spring came the way spring comes here, not gently, not all at once, but in arguments, a warm week and then snow again, and then mud, and then finally one morning you walk out and the smell of the air is different. The grass is greening in the low spots by the river, and you know the argument is over. There were those who had things to say about us. Among my own people and among the white traders and the agents who came through. There are always those with things to say. I do not pretend it was simple. I do not pretend Nell did not hear things, or that it did not cost her something to stand next to me in front of men who looked at her like she had lost her mind, or cost me something to hold my position in front of my own people when some of them thought my judgment had gone soft. What I will tell you is this. My people are readers of things. They have had to be. You do not survive what we have survived by reading things poorly. And what they read in Nell over the spring and into summer was not the white woman the agency men thought they saw. They read a woman who had learned their language with the same focused seriousness she applied to everything, who did not perform gratitude but simply worked alongside them, who could take a joke and give one back, whose daughter grew fat and loud and cheerful, and was beginning to try to pull herself up on things. My aunt was the first one to say it plainly. She said it to me one morning when I was watching Nell across the camp, which I had apparently been doing visibly enough that my aunt felt it warranted a comment. She came and stood next to me and looked where I was looking, and she said, "She is right for you." I said, "I know." My aunt said, "She is right for this camp." I said, "I know that too." My aunt said, "Then stop standing here looking at her like you are still deciding." I looked at my aunt. She said, "You decided in November. The rest has just been you making sure you had the right to be happy about it." I thought about that for a long time. We were married in the summer. A Lakota ceremony, which was what I asked for and what Nell said she wanted, and she meant it. I had learned by then how to tell when Nell meant something from when she was being polite about something, and she meant this. My aunt dressed her, and some of the younger women put things in her hair that she wore with the particular dignity she brought to everything, not performing it, simply receiving it as it was given. She stood next to me in front of the whole camp and in front of the sky, and she looked at me the way she had always looked at me, straight and direct, and I looked at her. I am not going to tell you I am a man given to ceremony. I have stood in front of my people for 30 years and delivered the things that needed to be delivered, and I have been good at that because I understood that what they needed from me was steadiness, not performance. But standing there that day with this woman beside me and mourning on my aunt's hip 20 feet away, already trying to eat the end of my aunt's braid, I understood something that I had thought I already understood, but apparently had not understood completely, which is that there is a difference between a man who is respected and a man who is seen. I had been respected for a long time. I had done things that earned respect, and I had carried it as my work. What Nell had done from the moment she put her hand on my face in the lamplight of February was see me, not the chief, not the man who found her in a ditch, me, the person behind all of the steadiness and the duty and the work of being what others needed me to be. She had looked at that person and she had said, "I will stay." That is not a small thing. That is not a thing I knew how to hold lightly. I think of a moment from that summer, not the wedding day, not any of the large moments, but a small one. Nell and I were at the river in the early morning, before the camp was up. She was washing Morning in the shallows, and Morning was objecting to this in the full-voiced way she had, and Nell was saying something low and unhelpful to her, something that was nominally soothing but was in fact her trying not to laugh, and Morning was having none of it and making this known. I was standing back, watching, and Morning saw me over her mother's shoulder, and pointed at me with the tremendous authority of an 8-month-old pointing at something she requires. Nell turned and looked at me. She said, "Your daughter needs you to explain why water is cold." I walked to the river's edge. I took Morning from her and held her against my chest, and she immediately stopped crying and grabbed a fistful of my hair and held it, which was her way of saying she was satisfied with where she was. Nell stood in the shallows looking up at me in Morning, and she had that look she sometimes got, the look that was not performed happiness but the real thing, quiet, certain, like someone who has found the place they meant to find and knows they are done looking. She said, "She likes you better than she likes me." I said, "That is not possible." She said, "It is absolutely possible and you know it." I said, "She will grow out of it." Nell laughed. I stood at the river with my daughter's fist in my hair and my wife laughing in the shallows, and the morning coming in off the plains, gold and wide and cold, and I thought, this is the shape of it. Not the saving, not the finding, not the ceremony. This, the ordinary weight of a morning and the people who have chosen to be in it with you. I have been a chief for a long time, and I have held this people through things that would have broken other men flat, and I carry that and I will carry it until I cannot carry it anymore. But I did not know until Nell that carrying it could also include this. The laugh at the river, the baby's grip, the gray eyes finding mine across the camp every morning with the particular look that says, "There you are." There is no way to explain how much that is worth to a man who had stopped expecting it. I will not try. Morning is 5 years old now. She runs the camp like she was born to it, which I suppose she was, and she has her mother's directness and her mother's grip on things and already a look on her face sometimes that stops me cold because it is my face, the serious deciding face, the one Nell told me about by the fire in February. She didn't get it from blood. She got it from watching. I choose to take that as one of the finer things anyone has ever given me. Nell cut her hair short last summer. I don't know why I remember this particularly. She came back from the river one afternoon with it cut just below her jaw, which she had done herself with her skinning knife, practical about it, not asking permission and not apologizing, just a decision she had made about herself. She looked exactly like herself. She always looks exactly like herself. That is not as common as it sounds. Last winter she learned to read the horses the way my uncle taught me, the small signs, the ear set, the particular way a horse distributes its weight when something has frightened it. She learned it the way she learns everything, by watching first, then doing, then making it hers. My uncle said she was a better student than I had been. I told him that was not a high bar. There is a thing she does when she thinks I am not looking. She watches me across whatever space we are in, and when I look up and find her doing it, she doesn't look away. She doesn't adjust her expression. She just holds it. Like I said earlier, the look that says "There you are." Like she is checking that I am still real, or maybe reassuring herself of something she already knows but wants to go on knowing. I know that feeling. I feel it every time I look at her. I have held a lot of things in my life. Weapons, grief, the weight of what my people carry. I have held all of it, and I will hold it as long as I am asked to. But the thing I did not know I needed to hold, the thing I did not have language for, was this woman's faith in me. This clean, certain, unperforming faith that I am exactly what I appear to be, and that is enough and more than enough. The train took her and threw her off and kept going. This land caught her. I caught her. I keep that.